Garden structures in the landscape can be from a wide variety of sources. You might find something at a store that you want to buy. You might make something yourself. One good thing you can do is make it yourself, and that way not only do you have something that's personal, but you have something that's custom made exactly the way you want it. One of the things you can use for garden structures, you might build trellises, you might build an arbor, you might build a pergola, you could have furniture or really small elements like a wind chime or a bird feeder. Trellises are a great way to integrate structure in an element of the garden that's functional as well as aesthetically appealing. And the materials you use to make these elements could be, like I said, anything from metal to wood to something really practical like plastic. But one great thing you could use is bamboo. Bamboo is variable, really versatile because it's a renewable resource. It's something that is easily harvested from your landscape. You can use it from a friend or a neighbor. It could be something you might have on your own, or it's something you can often purchase from a garden center or a box store. When you're making your garden structure, you're going to need a few things. Obviously, you're going to need bamboo. If you cut it yourself, you're going to want to let it dry out so that it's nice and cured, and it'll take on this golden yellow or even often a gray sheen. If you use green bamboo, sometimes it'll have splinters, so you want to be careful when you're cutting and make sure you wear gloves. Often when they dry, the bamboo stalks will lose these splinters, so they won't be as much of a problem when you're working with it after it's dried. When you do harvest the bamboo, the diameter doesn't really matter very much because as it dries, it'll harden pretty significantly. So if you have a really thin bamboo cane, don't worry about it if it's a little bendy, because once it's dry, it'll be nice and hard. We use bamboo stalks about 1 inch or 3/4 of an inch in diameter, and I find this is really easy to work with because it's a good balance between thick enough to really make a statement in the landscape, but also thin enough to where it's not difficult to work with. The length is really up to you. It depends on where you're putting it and what you want to use it for. I've seen small bamboo trellises that are 2 feet tall, and I've seen them 15 feet tall. So it really just depends on your garden and what you want to use it for. The bamboo structure we'll be making will be more of a teepee, so I tend to use stalks that are anywhere from 6 to 8 feet tall, just because when they get at an angle, obviously they're going to be a little bit shorter, and you want to make sure it's going to stand up nicely behind any types of plant material you put it on. The type of vine will somewhat dictate how you engineer this. If you have a vine that's a twiner or just a regular climber, you don't necessarily need support structure going across the actual bamboo stalk, so you can just put the bamboo together and it should be fine. Once you get the bamboo oriented and figure out what size bamboo you want to use, you're going to want to tie it together at the top. And often just a simple rope like a hemp rope or sisal will work just fine at the top of it. Now, because we have a humid and hot climate here in Florida, often what you'll want to do is replace this every year, or you could often use a durable material like a wire or a nylon rope underneath and then cover with something that's more natural looking so that you don't see the actual anchoring structure. Today we're just going to go ahead and use a sisal rope. I find this works just fine, and if the structure looks like it's falling apart a little bit, I'll just go back out and replace it later on. Along the lines of found elements in the landscape, one nice thing you can use to add a little bit of fun or a little bit of whimsy to your garden is take a found material like an old shovel, old garden tools, things like that, and just stick them in the landscape as a focal point. Usually if they're by themselves, they're not particularly attractive, so one fun thing to do is to paint it. You can just take a good outdoor spray paint, give a nice coat to something like an old shovel, and use it in the landscape, and we'll show you examples of where you can put these, where they might be most aesthetically appealing. But often, if it's used the same way as you would use, say, a piece of statuary or a trellis or some other type of ornament, it can be kind of a fun way to add a little bit of color to your garden. To assemble your structure, you're going to need a few things. Obviously, your bamboo. You'll need your rope, whether it's sisal or hemp, and you'll also want a pair of scissors or a knife. If you have a buddy, that'll be easier, but you could definitely do it by yourself, and I'll show you how. First, you want to pick up your bamboo, and if you handle the canes all together in one hand, it's much easier to put together than if you try to pick each one up individually. It can get a little bit unwieldy and out of hand if you try to handle them separately and put them together. So if you have them in a clump, figure out where you want your fulcrum point to be. So start putting the canes out at whatever diameter you want your trellis to be. And this really isn't rocket science. It's very easily adjustable. So if at first it's too narrow or too fat, it's really not a big deal to adjust it. Once you have your canes where you want them, you can kind of adjust it to make it look the way you want. And if you make sure you look at all three or all the sides of the teepee, make sure the canes are where you want them as far as how far apart they're spaced, Make sure there's enough room in the middle for your plant. That's the most important part. Or if you're going to be planting vines at each cane, make sure there's enough space between them to where they have plenty of room to grow. Once you have them all together and how you want them, pick up your rope. And the easiest way to start is to take one cane and just go ahead and make a really easy slip knot. And you just loop the rope around and pull it back through so that it's taut. Then you want to take your sisal or your rope and just gradually wrap it around your structure and make sure that you get it at least looped around or tied in a knot around each cane individually. And what this will do is help add to the stability for when you get them tied together. And this is the part where if you did have a different material that you wanted to anchor your bamboo with, like say florist tape, or if you wanted to use wire or something that's a little bit more durable, this is the part where you use that material. So this is actually going to be the anchoring material that actually holds the canes together. Then I just usually make a regular knot. If you want, you can make a slip knot. If you know the fancy nautical knots, you're welcome to use one of those. And there you go. Now that you've got your bamboo trellis set up and ready to go, two other things you can do to enhance your garden is take a shovel that you might not have liked before, that might be a little bit worse for the wear, might be unusable but not completely broken. What we did was we painted it bright red with a nice outdoor spray paint. And like I said, you could use any color, blue, yellow, red, but it's best to use a nice bright color that's going to stand out in the landscape. Another thing you can do is take a plant, whether it's a house plant or a container, and maybe it doesn't have so nice of a container by itself, but you want to dress it up for a party or just to make your patio look a little bit nicer. What you can do is just find a bucket or a galvanized tub or even just something that might not ordinarily be used as a container, but that you could pretend as a container because you're not actually planting it. You're taking your not so attractive pot that your plant is in and you're just dropping it inside this decorative container. So hopefully by now you have a trellis and a few pieces of art, or at least some great ideas to use to incorporate into your landscape. And a lot of these ideas apply whether you have just a container garden on a patio or a full-scale 6-acre yard. In a few years, hopefully you'll have something that looks a little bit like this, where your vine will be happily climbing up your trellis, and hopefully a few areas of your landscape will be brightened by a splash of color from something you didn't have to spend a lot of money on and didn't have to take a lot of time to build.